The emergency beacon cut through hyperspace like a scream in the void. Ambassador Kethril of the Galactic Harmony felt his four hearts sink as the distress signal reached the diplomatic station orbiting Nexus Prime. The message was clear, desperate, and terrifying in its implications. "This is High Chancellor Vexira of the Zephyrian Republic. Our worlds are under siege. The Void Hunters have returned from the dark between galaxies. Our fleets are shattered. Billions are dying. We invoke the ancient protocols of mutual defense. Any civilization receiving this transmission, we beg for immediate military assistance. Coordinates attached. Time is running short." Kethril's elongated fingers trembled as he forwarded the message to the Harmony Council. The Void Hunters were a nightmare made real, a species that had nearly wiped out all life in the galaxy 3 millennia ago before mysteriously vanishing beyond the galactic rim. If they had truly returned, no single civilization could stand against them alone. Within hours, the response came back from the council chambers. Every major power in the galaxy would contribute what they could. The elegant ethereal collective would send their psychic warfare specialists. The mighty Draconian Empire would deploy their heavily armored battleships. The technologically advanced synthesis would provide their quantum weaponry. Even the mysterious Void Walkers, who rarely involved themselves in galactic affairs, promised to send assistance. But as Kethril read through the deployment schedules, his heart sank further. It would take weeks, perhaps months, for the various fleets to reach Zephyrian space. The bureaucracy alone of coordinating such a massive joint operation would consume precious time that the dying Republic simply didn't have. There was one option that made him pause. At the bottom of the response list was a single-line entry, Terran Alliance response pending. Kethril had heard whispers about these Terrans, though few in the Harmony took them seriously. They were newcomers to galactic civilization, having achieved faster-than-light travel only centuries ago. Their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, and their military was untested against any major threat. Most species regarded them as barely more than clever animals that had somehow stumbled into space. Still, the ancient protocols required that all signatories be given the opportunity to respond. Kethril activated his communication array and sent the distress call to the Terran sectors, expecting either no response or perhaps a token gesture of a few outdated ships. He could never have imagined how wrong he was. 3 days later, as reports continued to pour in from Zephyrian space, painting an increasingly desperate picture, Kethril received an unexpected transmission on a secure diplomatic channel. The signal originated from somewhere in the Terran territories, and the voice that came through spoke accented but clear galactic standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, responding to the Zephyrian distress beacon. We have reviewed the situation and are prepared to offer immediate assistance. We can have a fleet at the coordinates within 48 hours. Kethril blinked in surprise. 48 hours. The fastest ships in the galaxy would take at least a week to reach Zephyrian space from the Terran sectors. He activated his response console with some skepticism. "Admiral Chen, this is Ambassador Kethril of the Galactic Harmony. While we appreciate your offer, I must ask if you fully understand the gravity of the situation. The Void Hunters are not some minor pirate fleet. They are an extinction-level threat that nearly destroyed our galaxy once before." The response came back immediately, and something in the human's tone made Kethril's skin crawl with an unfamiliar sensation he would later recognize as primal fear. "Ambassador, we've analyzed the data packets included with the distress signal. We understand exactly what we're dealing with. The Void Hunters made one critical mistake when they decided to target inhabited worlds." "And what mistake is that?" Kethril found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "They pissed off a Deathworld species." Before Kethril could ask what a Deathworld was, the transmission continued. "Our task force will arrive at the specified coordinates in 36 hours. We're transmitting our identification codes now for fleet coordination. Admiral Chen out." The communication ended, leaving Kethril staring at his console in bewilderment. A Deathworld species? What did that even mean? He quickly accessed the Harmony's xenobiological databases and searched for information about Earth, the Terran homeworld. What he found made his four hearts nearly stop beating. According to the reports, Earth was classified as a Class 12 Death World, one of the most hostile planetary environments ever discovered. The surface was dominated by massive oceans that could swallow entire continents in violent storms. The atmosphere contained a corrosive gas called oxygen that was toxic to most known life forms. The planet's magnetic field was constantly bombarded by radiation from its unstable star. Massive predators roamed the surface, some weighing hundreds of tons and armed with teeth the size of sword blades. And somehow, impossibly, an intelligent species had not just survived on this nightmare world, but had thrived to the point of achieving space travel. Kethril read further, his horror growing with each entry. Humans were omnivorous predators, meaning they hunted and killed other creatures for sustenance. They were capable of surviving in temperature ranges that would be instantly fatal to most galactic species. Their bodies were filled with redundant systems, allowing them to continue functioning even after sustaining injuries that would kill any civilized being. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to actually enjoy engaging in physical combat. The database contained numerous references to something called warfare, which appeared to be organized violence on a planetary scale. The humans had apparently spent most of their pre-spaceflight history fighting each other in increasingly destructive conflicts. And now, for the first time in their species' brief contact with galactic civilization, someone had given them a legitimate target for all that accumulated aggression. Kethril tried to contact the Zephyrian Republic to warn them about what was coming to their aid, but the communication networks in their space were failing as the Void Hunter assault intensified. All he could do was wait and hope that the cure wouldn't prove worse than the disease. He didn't have to wait long. 35 hours and 17 minutes after Admiral Chen's transmission, every sensor array in 3 star systems detected the same impossible reading. Something massive was dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The first ship to emerge was a kilometer-long vessel with a hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its design was utilitarian and brutal, clearly built for war rather than exploration or diplomacy. Weapon emplacements bristled along its surface like the spines of some predatory creature, and its engine output was generating readings that should have been physically impossible for a ship of that size. But it wasn't alone. One by one, more vessels dropped out of hyperspace. Massive dreadnoughts with hulls bearing scars from 1,000 battles, sleek destroyers that moved through space like hunting sharks. Carrier vessels disgorging clouds of small fighters that swarmed around the larger ships like angry insects. When the emergence finally ended, nearly 300 Terran vessels hung in space, their dark hulls gleaming with an ominous promise of violence. At their head, Admiral Chen's flagship transmitted a message to what remained of the Zephyrian command structure. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force First Fleet. We received your call for assistance. Please transmit current tactical situation and enemy positions. We are ready to engage." High Chancellor Vexira, speaking from a bunker deep beneath her planet's surface as Void Hunter ships bombarded the cities above, could barely believe what she was seeing on the tactical displays. Where had these Terrans come from? Why had no one heard of such a massive fleet? "Admiral Chen, this is High Chancellor Vexira. Your arrival is unexpected. I must warn you, the Void Hunters are not like any enemy you may have faced before. They show no mercy, take no prisoners, and seem to exist only to destroy. Perhaps you should coordinate with the other galactic fleets and wait for." Chen's response cut through the transmission with the finality of a blade. "High Chancellor, with all due respect, you called for help. We're here to provide it. Transmit the enemy positions and stand clear. We'll handle the Void Hunters." From his position on the diplomatic station, Kethril watched the sensor readings with a mixture of fascination and growing dread. The Terran fleet was moving toward the inner system, where the Void Hunters were conducting their assault, but their approach patterns were unlike anything in standard galactic military doctrine. They weren't advancing in the careful, coordinated formations that characterized civilized warfare. Instead, they moved like a pack of predators closing in on wounded prey, their ships weaving between each other in complex patterns that somehow never resulted in collisions. And then, as the first Terran vessels came within range of the Void Hunter scouts, Kethril witnessed something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his long life. The humans opened fire. The weapons that lanced out from the Terran ships weren't the elegant energy beams or sophisticated missile systems used by galactic militaries. They were crude, brutal, and absolutely devastating. Kinetic rounds moving at significant fractions of light speed punched through Void Hunter shields like they were made of tissue paper. Explosives that seemed to tear holes in space itself detonated among enemy formations. And from the larger ships came beams of raw energy that could cut a kilometer-long vessel in half with a single sustained burst. The Void Hunter scouts, accustomed to facing civilized opponents who fought with precision and restraint, found themselves completely unprepared for the sheer savagery of the human assault. In less than 10 minutes, an entire patrol fleet that had been ravaging the outer Zephyrian colonies was reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. But the humans weren't finished. As the Void Hunter main fleet rushed to respond to this unexpected threat, they found the Terrans doing something that no galactic military would ever consider. They split their forces. Smaller flotillas of human ships scattered throughout the star system, engaging Void Hunter formations wherever they found them. There was no central command structure, no careful coordination of resources. Each group of ships seemed to operate independently, striking hard and fast before melting away into the dark between planets. It was chaos, it was insanity, it was completely contrary to every principle of civilized warfare. And it was working. The Void Hunters, who had spent 3 millennia perfecting their tactics against the ordered, predictable strategies of galactic civilizations, found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't follow any of the established rules. Human ships appeared where they shouldn't be able to appear, struck at targets that should have been too well defended to attack, and disappeared before the Void Hunters could mount an effective response. From his command bridge, Admiral Chen watched the tactical display with the cold satisfaction of a predator watching its prey stumble into a carefully laid trap. The Void Hunters were powerful, certainly, and their technology was more advanced than humanity's in many ways. But they had made one fatal error. They had assumed that all intelligent species would fight the way they fought, with honor, with restraint, with respect for the established conventions of civilized warfare. Humans, having evolved on a world where such luxuries meant death, had never developed those particular limitations. As the battle raged through the Zephyrian system, Kethril found himself frantically sending updates to the Galactic Harmony Council. But how could he possibly explain what he was witnessing? How could he make them understand that these primitive newcomers were systematically dismantling an enemy that had once brought the galaxy to its knees? The answer came in the form of a transmission from High Chancellor Vexira, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief as she watched her people's executioners being hunted through their own star system like animals. Ambassador Kethril, I don't know what manner of beings these Terrans are, but they fight like demons given form. The Void Hunters are retreating. For the first time since the siege began, they're actually retreating. Kethril stared at his displays as sensor readings confirmed the impossible. The Void Hunter fleet, after suffering casualties that would have broken any civilized military, was indeed beginning to withdraw toward the system's edge. But the humans weren't letting them go. As the alien invaders fled, the Terran fleet pursued them with a relentless determination that bordered on obsessive. They hounded the retreating ships past the outer planets, past the system's asteroid belt, all the way to the edge of interstellar space. And there, as the Void Hunters prepared to jump to hyperspace and regroup, Admiral Chen's flagship transmitted a message on all frequencies that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force addressing the Void Hunter fleet. You have attacked innocent civilians. You have destroyed inhabited worlds. You have committed acts of genocide against species that posed no threat to you. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something in the human's voice that made every sensor operator in 3-star systems involuntarily shiver. We are humans. We are apex predators from a death world where mercy is a luxury and survival requires absolute brutality. You wanted to play extinction games with helpless prey species. Now you get to play them with us. Another pause, longer this time, filled with an ominous promise. Run fast, run far, because now you're not the hunters anymore. You're the prey, and we are very, very good at hunting. As the Void Hunter fleet vanished into hyperspace, fleeing in genuine terror for the first time in their species' history, Kethril realized that the galaxy had just changed in ways that no one could have predicted. They had summoned aid against an extinction-level threat, and the response had come from a species that was, in its own way, just as terrifying as the enemy they had defeated. The Deathworld species had arrived on the galactic scene, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UTS Retribution, watching the tactical display as her fleet settled into defensive positions around the wounded Zephyrian Republic. 3 days had passed since the Void Hunters' retreat, and the aftermath was proving almost as challenging as the battle itself. "Admiral, we're receiving another diplomatic request," reported Commander Martinez from the communications station. "This one's from something called the Ethereal Collective. They want to discuss coordination protocols for future joint operations." Chen suppressed a snort. In the 72 hours since their arrival, her fleet had received no fewer than 37 diplomatic inquiries from various galactic powers, all suddenly very interested in establishing relations with the Terran Defense Force. Where had all this interest been during humanity's first century of galactic contact, when they'd been dismissed as primitive newcomers? "Add it to the list, Commander. Right now, our priority is helping the Zephyrians get their infrastructure back online." The true scale of the Void Hunter assault was becoming clear as human survey teams spread throughout the star system. 17 colonies had been completely sterilized, their entire populations vaporized by weapons that left no trace behind except empty cities and silent orbital installations. The survivors were scattered across dozens of refugee camps on the inner worlds, their numbers reduced from billions to mere millions. Chen had seen war before. Humanity's expansion into space hadn't been peaceful, marked by conflicts with hostile alien species and territorial disputes with neighboring powers. But this was different. This was industrial-scale genocide, conducted with a cold efficiency that made even hardened military veterans feel sick. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Commander Ockafer from the sensor station, "I'm picking up multiple hyperspace signatures approaching the system. Configuration suggests..." "Yes, it's the Draconian Empire fleet." Chen nodded grimly. The first of the real, galactic powers had finally arrived to assist with the cleanup. She'd been dreading this moment, knowing that the arrival of the traditional military forces would inevitably lead to questions about human capabilities that she wasn't entirely prepared to answer. The Draconian fleet that emerged from hyperspace was impressive by any standard. 50 massive battleships, each one bristling with heavy armor and advanced shielding systems. Their design philosophy was clear, built to withstand punishment and deliver devastating firepower in return. These were the ships that had held the line against pirate fleets and territorial incursions for the past 1,000 years. Admiral Thekvar, the Draconian fleet commander, opened communications within minutes of arrival. His reptilian features filled the main screen, golden scales gleaming under the bridge lighting of his flagship. "Admiral Chen, I am Admiral Thekvar of the Imperial 7th Fleet. I must say your reputation precedes you. The reports from the Harmony Council speak of a most unusual engagement." "Admiral Thekvar, welcome to the Zephyrian system. We're coordinating relief efforts with the surviving Republic leadership. Your assistance is appreciated." Thekvar's forked tongue flicked out briefly, a sign of confusion among his species. "Indeed. However, I must confess some puzzlement about the tactical reports we received. According to our intelligence, the Void Hunter force that attacked this system numbered over 2,000 vessels, yet our sensors indicate you engaged them with fewer than 300 ships. How is this possible?" Chen had been expecting this question. The Draconians, like most galactic militaries, fought using traditional tactics that emphasized numerical superiority and technological advantage. The idea that a smaller force could defeat a larger one through superior strategy was foreign to their military doctrine. "We used unconventional tactics, Admiral. The Void Hunters weren't prepared for our approach." "Unconventional how?" Thekvar pressed. "Our databases indicate that human technology is, well, to be frank, primitive compared to galactic standards. Your ships appear to use chemical propulsion, kinetic weapons, and nuclear fusion reactors. How did such equipment prove effective against Void Hunter energy shielding?" Chen felt a familiar tension building between her shoulder blades. This was the conversation she'd been avoiding with galactic authorities for decades. Humanity's approach to warfare was considered crude and barbaric by civilized standards, but it was also devastatingly effective against enemies who expected their opponents to fight properly. Admiral, perhaps this discussion would be better conducted in person. Would you care to transfer to my ship for a tactical briefing? An hour later, Admiral Thekvar materialized on the Retribution's transporter pad, flanked by 2 junior officers and a diplomatic attaché. Chen was waiting to greet them personally, partly out of courtesy, and partly because she wanted to control exactly what the Draconians saw of human military capabilities. The tour began in the ship's war room, where holographic displays showed the recent battle in all its chaotic glory. Thekvar studied the tactical data with growing amazement, his reptilian eyes tracking the seemingly random movements of human vessels throughout the engagement. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, watching a destroyer squadron execute a maneuver that brought them within point-blank range of a Void Hunter battleship. "Your ship's approach to contact distance. In civilized warfare, such tactics would be considered suicide. In human warfare, such tactics are called getting close enough to make sure you hit your target," Chen replied dryly. "When you're outgunned and outnumbered, you can't afford to waste ammunition on long-range shots." Thekvar turned to study her with obvious fascination. "But surely your ship's defense systems couldn't withstand return fire at such close range." "They couldn't. We lost 37 vessels during the engagement." The Draconian admiral's eyes widened. In civilized galactic warfare, losing more than 5% of one's force was considered a disaster that would typically result in immediate retreat. The humans had absorbed over 10% casualties and continued fighting. "Admiral, with the greatest respect, how does your command structure function when subordinate commanders are expected to accept such losses?" Chen led the group to the next display, which showed individual ship actions during the battle. "Admiral, what's the primary goal of your military doctrine?" "To achieve strategic objectives while minimizing casualties and preserving resources," Thekvar replied immediately. "Ours is simpler. Win the fight. Everything else is secondary." The Draconian delegation exchanged uncomfortable glances. Chen could see they were struggling to understand a military philosophy that prioritized victory over survival, that treated ships and even lives as expendable resources in service of a larger goal. The tour continued through the ship's armory, where racks of kinetic ammunition shared space with fusion warheads that would have been considered war crimes by galactic convention. The weapons were crude by civilized standards, designed for maximum destructive effect rather than precision or elegance. "These are remarkable," admitted Commander Zethkar, Thekvar's tactical specialist. He was examining a human assault rifle, its simple but effective design clearly puzzling him. "This appears to be a projectile weapon that fires solid ammunition. We haven't seen such devices for centuries." "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways," Chen replied. "Energy weapons are sophisticated and efficient, but they can be disrupted by electromagnetic interference or absorbed by specialized shielding. A chunk of depleted uranium moving at 3,000 meters per second doesn't care about your energy shields." The real shock came when they visited the ship's medical bay. Dr. Elizabeth Park, the Retribution's chief medical officer, was treating wounded crew members with techniques that seemed to horrify the Draconian observers. "This patient suffered severe radiation burns during the battle," Dr. Park explained, indicating a Marine whose left arm was heavily bandaged. "We've grafted synthetic skin over the damaged area and administered cellular regeneration therapy. He should be back to full combat effectiveness within a week." Thekvar stared at the wounded human in disbelief. "He's returning to combat duty with such injuries." "The arm works fine," the Marine interjected with a grin. "Hell, it's probably stronger than before with all the metal they put in it." After the tour concluded and the Draconian delegation had returned to their own ship, Chen found herself alone in her ready room, reviewing reports from across the system. The human fleet was making good progress on rescue and recovery operations, but each report brought new evidence of the Void Hunter's ruthlessness. Her contemplation was interrupted by a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Williams' weathered face appeared on her personal screen, his expression grave. "Sarah, I've been monitoring the situation out there. How are you holding up?" "We drove them off, sir. but the cost to the Zephyrians was enormous. These Void Hunters make the Krellian War look like a minor border skirmish. Williams nodded grimly. The Krellian War had been humanity's first major conflict since achieving interstellar travel, a brutal 3-year campaign against a hostile insectoid species that had nearly driven the young Terran colonies to extinction. It had been that conflict that had shaped humanity's current military doctrine, teaching them that in space, there was no such thing as a fair fight. What's the galactic response been like? Mixed. They're grateful we stopped the Void Hunters, but they're also clearly disturbed by our methods. The Draconians think we're insane for accepting the casualties we took. The Ethereals are scandalized by our weapons technology, and everyone wants to know how we managed to get a fleet here so quickly. About that, Williams said carefully, the Council has made a decision regarding disclosure. Given the current situation, we're authorized to reveal the existence of the Gateway Network to selected galactic powers. Chen leaned back in her chair, absorbing the implications. The Gateway Network was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a system of artificial wormholes that allowed near-instantaneous travel between key star systems. It was the technology that had allowed human civilization to spread rapidly through their local sector of space, and had given them strategic mobility that no other galactic power possessed. Which powers, sir? The Zephyrians, obviously. They've earned the right to know how we got here so fast. The Draconians, since they seem to be taking the lead on coordinating galactic military response. Beyond that, we'll play it by ear. The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. The galaxy had summoned aid against an extinction-level threat, and humanity had responded with characteristic directness. But now the real challenge would begin, integrating a Deathworld species into a galactic community that had never dealt with anything quite like them. Her musings were interrupted by another priority alert. Lieutenant Commander Ockhaffer's voice came over the ship's communication system with barely controlled excitement. Admiral, you need to see this. We've just detected a massive hyperspace signature approaching the system. The energy readings are, well, they're off the charts. Chen made her way quickly to the bridge, where the sensor displays were showing something that defied easy explanation. A single vessel was approaching the system, but its energy signature was larger than some space stations. As it dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, the long-range sensors finally got a clear reading. The ship was enormous, easily 5 kilometers in length and bristling with weapons that seemed to bend space around them. Its hull was a dark, organic-looking material that seemed to absorb sensor beams, making detailed scans nearly impossible. Most disturbing of all, it bore the distinctive design elements that every galactic civilization had learned to fear. It was a Void Hunter command vessel. But something was wrong with it. The ship's energy signatures were erratic, its flight path unstable. As it approached the inner system, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches, a weak transmission reached the human fleet. This is Captain Hexmoth of the Void Hunter Fleet 77. Our ship has been. We require immediate assistance. Repeat, we require immediate assistance. The bridge fell silent as every human officer processed the impossible. A Void Hunter vessel, part of a species that had just committed genocide against the Zephyrians, was requesting help from the very forces that had driven them away. Chen stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. This could be a trap, an attempt to infiltrate human defenses. It could be a genuine request for aid from a damaged enemy vessel, or it could be something else entirely. Commander Martinez, open a channel. Let's see what they want. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of the alien vessel. What Chen saw made her breath catch in her throat. The bridge was a scene of devastation, with several crew members floating lifelessly in the zero gravity. The few survivors moved with obvious pain, their movements sluggish and uncertain. But it was the speaker that truly captured her attention. Captain Hexmoth was clearly a Void Hunter, his elongated form and pale, almost translucent skin marking him as a member of the species that had just attempted to wipe out the Zephyrian Republic. But his large, dark eyes held something Chen had never expected to see in an enemy: fear. Human vessel, I am Captain Hexmoth. I must speak with your commander. It concerns information about my people's plans that you need to know. Chen stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. I'm Admiral Chen. What kind of information? Hexmoth's form seemed to waver on the screen, whether from interference or physical weakness, Chen couldn't tell. When he spoke, his voice carried a desperation that seemed genuine. "Admiral, what happened here was not the full assault. The fleet you defeated was merely an advance force sent to test galactic defenses. The true Void Hunter Armada is still gathering in the space between galaxies. Millions of ships, planet-killer weapons, technology that can sterilize entire star systems." The bridge fell silent. Chen felt ice forming in her stomach as the implications hit her. If this was true, then the battle they had just won was merely the opening skirmish in a war that could consume the entire galaxy. "Why are you telling us this?" Hexmoth's dark eyes met hers through the screen, and for a moment, Chen saw something that changed everything she thought she knew about the enemy they faced. "Because, Admiral, when your fleet engaged our forces, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in 3,000 years, Void Hunter ships fled from battle. For the first time in our species' history, we experienced what you call fear." He paused, his breathing labored. "There are those among my people who believe this changes everything, who believe that perhaps the old ways, the endless consumption of other species, may not be the only path forward." Chen stared at the screen, her tactical mind racing. A Void Hunter defector could provide intelligence that would be invaluable in the coming conflict. But could they trust him? Could they trust any member of a species that had just committed genocide? "Captain, I'm going to have your ship taken into custody. If you're genuine about helping us, you'll submit to interrogation and provide everything you know about Void Hunter capabilities and plans." Hexmoth nodded slowly. "I understand, Admiral, but I must warn you, there are those among my people who will see my actions as the ultimate betrayal, if they discover what I have done." "Then we'll protect you," Chen said firmly. "Surrender your vessel and prepare to be boarded." As the human fleet moved to secure the damaged Void Hunter ship, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed another threshold. First contact with a defeated enemy seeking asylum. The revelation that the recent battle was merely a prelude to a much larger war. And perhaps most importantly, the first crack in what had seemed like an utterly alien and implacable foe. The galaxy had summoned aid against an extinction threat, and the Deathworlders had answered. But now it seemed that the real war was just beginning, and humanity was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who changed sides. In the depths of space, far beyond the galactic rim, massive shipyards that had been dormant for millennia hummed with renewed activity. The Void Hunter High Command had received the reports from the Zephyrian system, and for the first time in their species' history, they were planning not just another conquest, but a war of total extermination. The galaxy had revealed that it harbored a species capable of fighting back. That was a problem that required a permanent solution. The interrogation chamber aboard the UTS Retribution was deliberately austere, containing only a simple table, 2 chairs, and recording equipment that would capture every nuance of the conversation taking place within its walls. Admiral Chen sat across from Captain Hexmoth, studying the alien defector with the careful attention of a predator evaluating potential prey. 3 weeks had passed since the Void Hunter captain had surrendered his damaged vessel. In that time, human intelligence specialists had verified much of his initial information through independent sources and captured enemy technology. The picture that emerged was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. "Tell me about the Harvester Protocol," Chen said, her voice carefully neutral as she referenced one of the most disturbing elements of Hexmoth's testimony. The former Void Hunter commander shifted uncomfortably in his specially designed chair. His elongated form made sitting in human furniture awkward, but he had adapted with the same pragmatic flexibility that had kept him alive during his species' retreat. "The protocol it is the culmination of 3 millennia of preparation," he began, his accented galactic standard carrying undertones of something that might have been shame. "When my people first left this galaxy, it was not by choice. We were driven out by a coalition much like the one forming now, species that had learned to work together against our expansion." Chen nodded. This matched the historical records that galactic archaeologists had pieced together from ancient ruins and surviving artifacts. The first Void Hunter War had nearly destroyed galactic civilization, but ultimately the various species had united to push the invaders back. We spent those millennia in the space between galaxies, not just rebuilding our strength, but learning, studying. We sent scout ships back periodically, monitoring your development, watching how your civilizations grew and changed. Hexmoth's dark eyes met hers. We learned that galactic species have certain predictable patterns. You develop technology along specific paths. You organize your militaries according to established doctrines. You even fight your wars according to unwritten rules that limit destruction. And you plan to exploit those patterns. Yes, the Harvester Protocol was designed to systematically dismantle galactic civilization by targeting its fundamental weaknesses. Economic centers would be destroyed to create supply chain collapse. Communication networks would be severed to prevent coordination. Key industrial worlds would be sterilized to eliminate manufacturing capacity. Hexmoth paused, his breathing becoming more labored as he continued. The final phase would involve planet crackers, weapons capable of literally destroying entire worlds. Chen felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. The concept of planet crackers was theoretical among human scientists, requiring energy outputs that seemed impossible to achieve. The fact that the Void Hunters possessed working versions was deeply troubling. How many ships are we talking about in the main fleet? The last count I was privy to indicated approximately 57 million vessels of various classes. Dreadnoughts, carriers, support ships, and specialized siege platforms. The industrial capacity of 17 empty galaxies has been devoted to this single operation. The number hit Chen like a physical blow. 57 million ships. Even if each individual vessel was no more capable than the ones they had already faced, the sheer scale of such a force was beyond anything the galaxy could possibly resist through conventional means. When will they arrive? Hexmoth's expression became even more grim. That depends entirely on what message the advance fleet managed to transmit before its destruction. If they reported the existence of effective resistance, particularly resistance from an unknown species, the High Command will accelerate their timeline. Unknown species. Admiral, you must understand that my people have been monitoring galactic communications for centuries. We knew about every major military power, every technological advancement, every strategic alliance. But humans, he paused, seeming to struggle with the concept. Humans appeared in galactic space seemingly overnight, with technology that should not exist and tactics that violate every assumption we had made about how intelligent species fight. Chen leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Humanity's rapid expansion into galactic space had indeed been unusual, accelerated by the discovery of ancient gateway technology in the ruins of a long-dead civilization. But she hadn't realized that their sudden appearance had been quite so dramatic from an outside perspective. What specifically about human tactics surprised you? Hexmoth was quiet for a long moment, his pale skin taking on an even more translucent quality. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone trying to explain a fundamentally alien concept. Your species fights as if death is preferable to defeat. This is unprecedented in galactic civilization. Most intelligent species develop strong survival instincts that prevent them from taking excessive risks. They prefer to retreat and regroup rather than accept heavy casualties in pursuit of victory. But humans don't. No, your ships engaged our forces at ranges that guaranteed mutual destruction. Your crews continued fighting even after sustaining damage that should have forced surrender. And your fleet coordination suggested that individual unit survival was considered less important than achieving tactical objectives. Hexmoth leaned forward slightly. Admiral, in 3,000 years of warfare, my people have never encountered a species willing to trade losses at such ratios. Chen nodded slowly. This wasn't the first time that human military doctrine had been described as suicidal by galactic standards. The willingness to accept casualties that other species would consider unacceptable was a product of Earth's harsh environment, where survival had always required a willingness to fight against impossible odds. There's something else, Hexmoth continued. The advance fleet reported weapon impacts from systems that our sensors couldn't identify, kinetic weapons moving at velocities that should require exotic matter manipulation, explosive devices that generated energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. How is this possible with primitive technology? Chen allowed herself a slight smile. This was getting into areas where human ingenuity had found ways around technological limitations through sheer bloody-minded determination. We may not have the most advanced technology in the galaxy, but we're very good at making what we have worked beyond its design specifications. When you can't build a weapon that's elegant and sophisticated, you build one that's crude and devastating. The kinetic weapons, for example, mass drivers using magnetic acceleration systems. The rounds are simple chunks of metal, but we fire them using power levels that most species would consider dangerously unstable. The result is projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. Hexmoth's eyes widened. You're using technology that risks catastrophic system failure for marginal increases in weapons performance. We're using technology that gets results. System failure is an engineering problem. Losing a battle is a survival problem. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority communication from the bridge. Commander Martinez's voice came through the ship's intercom with obvious urgency. Admiral, we're receiving an emergency transmission from the Galactic Harmony Council. They're requesting an immediate conference with all fleet commanders in the system. Chen stood, nodding to the Marine guards who would escort Hexmoth back to his secured quarters. We'll continue this later, Captain. I have a feeling the War Council is about to become a lot more interesting. The holographic conference chamber was crowded with representatives from across the galaxy. Admiral Thekvar represented the Draconian Empire, his golden scales gleaming under the artificial lighting. Ethereal Collective Overseer Zarath appeared as a shimmering energy pattern that hurt to look at directly. The synthesis delegate, computational node 7742, manifested as a geometric crystal formation that pulsed with internal light. Even the mysterious Void Walkers had sent a representative, though their delegate appeared only as a vague humanoid shadow. At the center of the gathering, Ambassador Kethril looked exhausted. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, and his four hearts were beating rapidly enough that their rhythm was visible through his skin. "Fellow beings," he began, his voice strained. "I have called this emergency session because we have received intelligence that fundamentally changes our understanding of the current threat." He activated a holographic display that showed star charts extending far beyond the galactic rim. "Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive energy signatures in the intergalactic void. Analysis suggests industrial activity on a scale that defies comprehension." The ethereal delegate's energy pattern flickered with what might have been alarm. How massive? Conservative estimates suggest manufacturing capacity equivalent to the combined industrial output of our entire galaxy, sustained for approximately 3,000 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Chen felt the weight of Hexmoth's testimony pressing against her mind as she realized that the intelligence he had provided was being confirmed by independent observation. "There's more," Kethril continued. "Long-range sensors have detected movement. A fleet of unprecedented size is approaching our galaxy. Current projections indicate arrival within 6 to 8 standard months." Admiral Thekvar's forked tongue flicked out nervously. "How unprecedented?" "Initial sensor sweeps suggest millions of vessels, possibly tens of millions. The exact number is impossible to determine due to the distance involved and what appears to be sophisticated sensor masking technology." The synthesis delegate's crystal form pulsed rapidly. "Such a force would represent an extinction-level event for galactic civilization. No combination of our current military assets could hope to resist." "Which brings us to the purpose of this conference," Kethril said, turning to look directly at Chen. "Admiral Chen, the Terran Defense Force demonstrated capabilities in the recent engagement that were unexpected. The Galactic Council needs to understand exactly what resources humanity can bring to bear in the coming conflict." Chen had been dreading this moment. Full disclosure of human capabilities would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with galactic civilization. But with an extinction-level threat approaching, secrecy was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Delegates, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels of human government. Before I continue, I need assurance that this information will be treated with appropriate discretion." The various delegates exchanged glances, their alien expressions showing a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Kethril spoke for the group. "Admiral, given the current crisis, I believe I can speak for all present when I say that the survival of galactic civilization takes precedence over normal diplomatic protocols. You have our assurance." Chen took a deep breath and activated her own holographic display. A three-dimensional map of local galactic space appeared, showing human territories that were much larger than any of the delegates had suspected. The Terran Alliance currently maintains sovereignty over approximately 200 star systems, with a total population of roughly 50 billion humans. Our industrial base includes manufacturing facilities on over 300 worlds. Admiral Thekvar's eyes widened. But according to our records, humans have only been in space for a few centuries. How did you achieve such rapid expansion? Through technology that we discovered rather than developed. Approximately 150 years ago, human explorers found the ruins of an ancient civilization in what is now the Sol system's asteroid belt. Among the artifacts recovered was a functional gateway network. Chen manipulated the display to show the complex web of connections between human worlds. The gateways allow near-instantaneous travel between linked points in space. We've been able to expand our territory and industrial base much more rapidly than would normally be possible. The Void Walker delegate spoke for the first time, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The Builder's network still functions. We had assumed it was lost eons ago. You know about the civilization that created them. We knew them. They disappeared long before the first Void Hunter War, but their technology was legendary, if humans have access to such systems." The shadow figure paused. "What is your fleet's strength?" This was the question Chen had been most reluctant to answer. "Our active military consists of approximately 15,000 vessels of various classes, supported by extensive defensive installations throughout our territory." The numbers caused a stir among the delegates. 15,000 ships was a respectable force, but still only a fraction of what would be needed against the approaching threat. "However," Chen continued, "human military doctrine is built around total war principles. In a crisis situation, our industrial capacity can be converted to military production on a scale that most civilizations would consider impossible." She activated another display showing human industrial statistics. Every human world maintains manufacturing capability that can be retooled for military purposes within weeks. Our population is trained from childhood in basic military skills, and our gateway network allows us to move resources and personnel at rates that give us strategic mobility unmatched by any other galactic power. Overseer Zarath's energy pattern pulsed thoughtfully. "You're describing a military-industrial complex that encompasses your entire civilization." "That's exactly what I'm describing. Humans evolved on a world where survival required constant preparation for the next crisis. We've simply scaled that mentality up to galactic proportions." Admiral Thekvar leaned forward, his reptilian features intent. "Admiral, what kind of fleet strength could humanity theoretically deploy if your entire industrial base was converted to military production?" Chen had hoped to avoid this question, but given the circumstances, complete honesty seemed necessary. "Conservative estimates suggest we could field approximately 200,000 vessels within one standard year, assuming full industrial conversion and unlimited resource allocation." The silence that followed was absolute. 200,000 ships represented a fleet larger than some galactic powers possessed in their entire history. The idea that a single species could deploy such force was staggering. "There would be costs," Chen continued. "Full military conversion would require abandoning non-essential industrial production, implementing food rationing, and essentially placing our entire civilization on a wartime footing. But if we're facing an extinction-level threat, it would be necessary," finished computational node 7742. "Admiral, such capability could provide the foundation for effective resistance against the approaching threat." Kethral's 4 hearts were beating even faster now. "Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask whether humanity would be willing to coordinate its military preparations with the other galactic powers. The approaching threat requires a united response." Chen had been authorized to make this commitment before leaving Earth, but the magnitude of what they were discussing still gave her pause. Humanity was about to abandon centuries of careful neutrality and commit fully to galactic defense. "Ambassador, if the intelligence we've received is accurate, then we're all facing extinction. Humanity will commit whatever resources are necessary to ensure the survival of galactic civilization. As the conference concluded, and the various delegates began making plans for unprecedented military cooperation, Chen couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically the situation had changed. Just weeks ago, humanity had been viewed as a minor galactic power, barely worth acknowledging. Now they were potentially the key to galactic survival. But even 200,000 human ships would be vastly outnumbered by the approaching Void Hunter Armada. Victory would require more than just numbers or industrial capacity. It would require the kind of tactical innovation and strategic thinking that had allowed humans to survive on a death world for millions of years. In the depths of space, beyond the edge of the galaxy, the first elements of the Void Hunter main fleet began their final approach. 57 million ships, armed with weapons that could crack planets and technologies that had been perfected over 3 millennia of conquest. They were coming to finish what their advance forces had started, to eliminate the species that had dared to resist them and to harvest the resources of an entire galaxy. What they didn't know was that they were about to face an enemy that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to fight against impossible odds. The galaxy had summoned aid against extinction, and the Deathworlders were preparing to answer that call with everything they had. The war room deep beneath Geneva had been hastily expanded to accommodate representatives from across the galaxy. What had once been a purely human strategic planning facility now hummed with alien technologies and translation equipment, as the largest military coalition in galactic history worked to coordinate their desperate defense. General Rebecca Martinez, Supreme Commander of Terran Defense Forces, stood before a holographic display that showed the current disposition of Allied fleets throughout the galaxy. The numbers should have been encouraging. Over 300,000 ships from dozens of species, all working toward a common goal. But the intelligence reports from long-range sensors made clear just how inadequate those numbers truly were. Current projections show the Void Hunter main fleet will reach the galactic rim in 43 days, she announced to the assembled commanders. Final composition estimates place their force strength at approximately 58 million vessels. Admiral Thekvar, his golden scales dulled by stress and lack of sleep, let out a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. We're outnumbered nearly 200 to 1. Even with the full industrial conversion, how can we possibly hope to mount an effective defense? By not fighting the war they expect us to fight, General Martinez replied. She manipulated the display to show human strategic doctrine. The Void Hunters have spent 3 millennia planning to face the galaxy they left behind, organized militaries fighting conventional battles for control of key systems. They're not prepared for what we're about to give them. Ethereal Overseer Zarath's energy pattern flickered with curiosity. Explain. Martinez activated a new display showing the gateway network that now connected every major system in the galaxy. In the months since the crisis began, human engineers had worked around the clock to extend the ancient transport system, creating a web of instantaneous travel that spanned galactic civilization. Traditional military doctrine requires holding territory, protecting supply lines, and maintaining clear chains of command. The Gateway Network allows us to abandon all of those constraints. She highlighted several key points on the map. We can move entire fleets from one side of the galaxy to the other in minutes. We can evacuate threatened populations before they can be targeted, and we can strike at enemy forces from directions they'll never expect. Captain Hexmoth, who had become an invaluable source of intelligence despite his origins, shifted uncomfortably in his restraints. Even as a collaborator, the former Void Hunter commander was still technically a prisoner, though one whose advice had proven crucial to Allied planning. General, you must understand that my people have developed countermeasures for rapid deployment systems. Gravitational interdiction fields, hyperspace dampeners, quantum entanglement scramblers. These tactics may work initially, but they won't work against gateway technology, interrupted Dr. Alina Vasquez, the chief scientist leading the human research team. We've run extensive tests. The ancient transport system operates on principles that current galactic technology can't disrupt. As far as we can determine, the gateways exist partially outside normal space-time. Synthesis computational node 7742's crystal form pulsed rapidly as it processed this information. You're describing strategic mobility that approaches tactical omnipresence, if forces can be deployed instantly anywhere in the galaxy. Then we can fight a war of movement instead of a war of attrition, Martinez finished. Small, highly mobile strike forces hitting Void Hunter formations wherever they're weakest, then vanishing before they can respond. The concept was revolutionary by galactic standards, but it was also humanity's best chance for survival. The assembled commanders began working through the implications, their various forms of communication creating a babel of alien voices and energy signatures. Admiral Sarah Chen, newly arrived from the front lines, entered the chamber with grim news. Generals, we've just received confirmation from our deep space monitoring stations. The Void Hunter fleet has accelerated their approach. New arrival estimate is 28 days. The room fell silent. 28 days to prepare for a war that would determine the survival of galactic civilization. It wasn't enough time, but it was all they had. "What's the status of the evacuation protocols?" Martinez asked. Chen consulted her tactical display. "We've successfully relocated populations from the outer rim systems. Approximately 12 billion sentients have been moved to heavily defended core worlds through the Gateway network, but we're running into capacity issues. The ancient transport system has limitations on mass transfer that we're pushing to their absolute limits." This had been one of the most challenging aspects of the defense preparations. The Gateway network could move ships and small groups instantaneously, but transferring entire planetary populations required careful scheduling and resource management. Human logistics specialists, accustomed to the complexities of Deathworld survival, had taken the lead on these operations. "We've also completed the industrial dispersal program," added Colonel James Park, head of human military production. "Critical manufacturing capabilities have been distributed across over 500 worlds. Even if the Void Hunters manage to destroy major industrial centers, we can maintain weapons production from hidden facilities throughout the galaxy." This, too, was a uniquely human contribution to galactic defense. Most civilizations concentrated their manufacturing in well-defended systems, making them efficient but vulnerable. Humans, accustomed to the constant threat of natural disasters on their homeworld, had learned to distribute critical capabilities across multiple redundant sites. General Martinez turned to address the alien commanders directly. "Before we finalize our battle plans, I need to know what each of your civilizations is prepared to contribute to this fight." Admiral Thekvar spoke for the Draconian Empire. "Our industrial capacity is fully committed to military production. We can field approximately 30,000 heavy battleships, supported by twice that number of smaller vessels. Our ships are built for sustained combat and can serve as anchors for defensive formations." Overseer Zarath's energy pattern shifted to indicate formal communication. "The Ethereal Collective offers our psychic warfare specialists. We can disrupt enemy communications, create false sensor readings, and potentially influence the decision-making processes of hostile commanders. Our contribution is quality rather than quantity." Computational node 7742 pulsed in its methodical rhythm. "The synthesis provides advanced targeting systems, quantum entanglement communication networks, and experimental weapons technologies. Our ships are few, but equipped with the most sophisticated systems available to galactic civilization." The Void Walker delegate, still appearing as an indistinct shadow, spoke with its characteristic whisper. "We offer knowledge of the ancient technologies that may prove relevant to this conflict. The builders who created your gateway network left other artifacts throughout the galaxy. Some may provide advantages against the approaching threat." Martinez nodded, making mental notes as she integrated these capabilities into the overall defense plan. Each species brought unique strengths to the coalition, but success would depend on how effectively they could coordinate their diverse approaches to warfare. "Captain Hexmoth," she said, turning to the former enemy commander, "given what you know about Void Hunter tactics and capabilities, how would you expect your former colleagues to approach this invasion?" The pale alien considered the question carefully before responding. "The High Command will expect organized resistance at key strategic points: major shipyard systems, core industrial worlds, centers of government and communication. They will deploy their largest formations against these targets, expecting fierce but ultimately futile resistance." "What won't they expect?" "Asymmetric warfare conducted on a galactic scale. My people are accustomed to enemies who fight to hold territory, to protect their populations and infrastructure. An enemy that abandons fixed positions and uses the entire galaxy as a battlefield. This would be unprecedented. Martinez smiled grimly. Asymmetric warfare was something humans understood better than any species in the galaxy. When you were outgunned and outnumbered, you didn't meet your enemy's strength with your own strength. You found ways to make their advantages irrelevant. Dr. Vasquez, what's the status of the Special Weapons Program? The scientist's expression became troubled. We've made progress, but the ethical implications are significant. The technologies we're developing push the boundaries of what most galactic civilizations would consider acceptable warfare. This was another area where human thinking diverged from galactic norms. Most species had developed strong cultural prohibitions against weapons of mass destruction, preferring to limit conflicts to minimize collateral damage. Humans, faced with extinction, were willing to use whatever tools proved necessary for survival. Give me the details. Vasquez activated a secure display visible only to the human commanders. Project Sunbreaker involves weaponizing stellar engineering technology. We can trigger controlled solar flares that would sterilize entire star systems. Project Voidcutter uses artificial black hole generation to create gravity weapons capable of tearing apart large formations. And Project Mindburn. She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the last item. Project Mindburn uses modified ethereal psychic warfare technology to create permanent neurological damage in enemy crews. It's effectively a weapon that targets consciousness itself. The alien commanders exchanged uneasy glances. These were weapons concepts that went far beyond traditional military thinking, tools designed not just to defeat an enemy, but to eliminate them entirely. Admiral Thekvar's voice carried obvious distress. General Martinez, surely such measures are unnecessary. Even against an enemy like the Void Hunters, there must be limits to what civilized beings will do. Martinez met his gaze steadily. Admiral, in 28 days we're going to face an enemy that has spent 3,000 years planning to wipe out every intelligent species in this galaxy. They've committed genocide against countless civilizations, and they're coming here to finish the job. Given those circumstances, I'm willing to use any weapon that gives us a chance to survive. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The war they were about to fight wouldn't be a conventional conflict with clear rules and limited objectives. It would be a struggle for the very survival of galactic civilization, where victory would go to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. Captain Hexmoth broke the silence with an observation that chilled everyone present. General, there is one advantage your species possesses that may prove decisive, though you may not recognize it as such. What advantage? Humans are the only species I have encountered that seems capable of genuine hatred. Other civilizations fight for territory, resources, or self-defense. But humans can fight for the pure desire to destroy their enemies. Martinez considered this carefully. Hate was indeed a powerful motivator, but it was also a dangerous one. The challenge would be channeling that emotion into effective military action without losing the moral foundation that made their civilization worth defending. All commanders, return to your fleets and begin final preparations. We have 28 days to prepare for the largest battle in galactic history. Make them count. As the various delegates filed out of the war room, Martinez remained behind with her human staff officers. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did at this moment, with the survival of billions depending on decisions that would be made in the coming weeks. General, said Colonel Park quietly, are we really going to use those special weapons? Martinez stared at the holographic display showing the approaching Void Hunter fleet, an armada so large that it defied comprehension. 58 million ships, each one crewed by beings who viewed the extermination of other species as their natural right. Colonel, I hope we don't have to. But if it comes down to a choice between using those weapons and watching galactic civilization burn, then yes, we'll use everything we have. In the depths of space, the Void Hunter main fleet continued its inexorable approach. Their scouts had provided detailed intelligence about galactic military capabilities, and their tactical computers had calculated optimal strike patterns for maximum destruction. They were confident in their ability to complete the harvest that had been delayed for 3 millennia. What they couldn't calculate was the variable that had entered the equation since their last attempt at galactic conquest. For the first time in their species' history, they were about to face an enemy that had evolved on a world where extinction-level threats were a constant reality. The Deathworlders were preparing for war, and they were bringing every lesson learned from millions of years of survival against impossible odds. The galaxy had summoned aid against extinction, and that aid was about to respond with a fury that would shake the foundations of space itself. 28 days to the largest battle in galactic history. 28 days to determine whether intelligent life would survive in this corner of the universe. 28 days to discover whether Deathworld ingenuity could overcome the greatest military force ever assembled. The countdown had begun. The Void Hunter main fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the galactic rim like a plague of metal locusts descending upon a field of grain. From the bridge of the UTS Retribution, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the sensor displays with the cold calculation of a predator studying its prey. The enemy fleet stretched across light years of space, its sheer scale defying easy comprehension. 58 million ships, the combined industrial output of 17 empty galaxies, forged into the largest military force in the history of the universe. Their advanced formations alone numbered more vessels than most galactic civilizations possessed in their entire fleets. "Admiral," reported Commander Martinez from the sensor station, "we're reading multiple energy signatures consistent with Planet Cracker weapons. At least 300 distinct gravitational anomalies that could be artificial singularity generators. And something else. The computer can't classify it, but it's generating energy readings that shouldn't be physically possible." Chen nodded grimly. Intelligence from Captain Hexmoth had prepared them for most of the Void Hunter arsenal, but the defector had warned that his people's most advanced weapons remained classified even from fleet commanders. Whatever they were facing now represented 3 millennia of preparation for this single campaign. Time to contact. At current approach velocity, the outer scouts will reach the rim colonies in 6 hours. Main fleet arrival at galactic core systems estimated at 14 days. 6 hours. After months of preparation, the largest war in galactic history was about to begin in 6 hours. Signal all gateway stations. Initiate Protocol Omega. Across the galaxy, the ancient transport network came alive with unprecedented activity. Evacuation fleets began moving the last civilian populations from threatened systems. Military formations took their final positions for the opening moves of a campaign that would determine the survival of intelligent life in the galaxy. And in carefully hidden facilities, weapons that pushed the boundaries of acceptable warfare armed themselves for potential use. General Martinez's voice came through the ship's communication system from her command post on Earth. "All fleet commanders, this is Alpha Base. The enemy has arrived. Execute Plan Lazarus." Plan Lazarus. The code name had been chosen deliberately for its biblical implications. Death and resurrection. The end of one thing and the beginning of something entirely different. Humanity's contribution to galactic defense strategy was built around a simple premise. If conventional warfare couldn't save galactic civilization, then they would abandon the conventions. "Admiral Chen, you have tactical command of the opening engagement," General Martinez continued. "Remember, the goal isn't to stop them, it's to make them bleed." Chen activated the ship's general communication system, addressing not just her own crew, but the combined human fleet that had assembled at the galactic rim. 12,000 ships, representing the largest single deployment in human military history. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Today we face an enemy that believes intelligent life exists only to serve their expansion. They've crossed the void between galaxies to harvest our civilization like grain. They expect us to fight like every other species they've encountered. Organized, predictable, civilized." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "They're about to learn that humans don't fight like other species. We fight like the apex predators we are. All ships engage at will." The human fleet scattered like a school of fish fleeing a massive predator, individual squadrons disappearing into the gateway network to emerge at predetermined coordinates throughout the outer rim. It was a maneuver that violated every principle of traditional fleet tactics. But traditional tactics had never been designed to face an enemy that outnumbered you 50,000 to 1. The first engagement took place in the Kepler 442 system. where a Void Hunter scouting formation encountered Admiral Park's destroyer squadron emerging from a gateway barely 1,000 kilometers away. The range was so close that energy shields were irrelevant, weapons fire becoming a matter of pure destructive force rather than sophisticated targeting. Human kinetic weapons, crude by galactic standards but accelerated to devastating velocities, punched through Void Hunter hulls with brutal efficiency. Return fire from the alien ships was more sophisticated but less immediately destructive, designed for long-range duels rather than point-blank bloodbaths. In the 3 minutes before Admiral Park's squadron vanished back into the Gateway network, they destroyed 17 enemy vessels while losing 4 of their own. By traditional military standards, it was an acceptable exchange rate. By human standards, it was a promising beginning. Similar engagements erupted throughout the Outer Rim as human forces struck at isolated Void Hunter formations with the fury of cornered animals. The enemy scouts found themselves facing an enemy that appeared from nowhere, fought with suicidal intensity, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. But the human attacks were merely the opening movement of a larger symphony of destruction. As Void Hunter response forces began converging on the sites of the initial engagements, they encountered something unprecedented in their 3 millennia of conquest. The ethereal collective's psychic warriors struck without warning, their mental assault leaving entire crews catatonic at their posts. Draconian heavy battleships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive guns delivering coordinated salvos that could cripple even Void Hunter dreadnoughts. Synthesis vessels appeared like ghosts in the dark, their quantum weapons tearing holes in space itself. And throughout it all, the Gateway network allowed Allied forces to coordinate their attacks with precision that seemed impossible across galactic distances. Ships that had been fighting in one system could reinforce battles in another within minutes, creating a fluid dynamic that the Void Hunters had never encountered. On the bridge of the Void Hunter command ship Eternal Harvest, Supreme Commander Velter watched the tactical displays with growing confusion. His species had developed their invasion strategy based on 3,000 years of observing galactic military doctrine. Enemy fleets should have concentrated at key defensive positions, allowing his forces to engage and destroy them in decisive battles. Instead, he was facing an enemy that refused to stand and fight, that struck from unexpected directions and vanished before his superior numbers could be brought to bear. Worse, the aliens were coordinating their attacks across impossible distances, suggesting communication and transport technologies that his intelligence services had failed to detect. "Commander, we're receiving casualty reports from the Outer Scouts," reported his tactical officer, a being whose pale skin bore the ritual scars of 100 successful harvests. "Losses are significant." Velter's dark eyes narrowed. "Define significant." "We've lost over 3,000 vessels in the first wave of engagements. The enemy appears to be using weapons and tactics that our databases don't recognize." 3,000 ships. In conventional warfare, such losses would be acceptable when spread across an entire campaign. But to lose so many vessels in the opening hours of engagement was unprecedented in Void Hunter military history. Analysis of enemy capabilities. "Inconsistent, Commander. We're facing ships using primitive kinetic weapons that somehow achieve energy outputs comparable to our most advanced systems. Enemy fleet coordination suggests faster-than-light communication across galactic distances, and their tactical doctrine appears to prioritize maximum damage over unit survival." Velter studied the tactical data, his strategic mind working through the implications. His people had planned for resistance, but they had assumed that resistance would follow predictable patterns. The enemy they were actually facing seemed to operate outside the normal constraints of civilized warfare. Accelerate the advance. Deploy the Harvester squadrons to the core systems. If the Outer Rim defenders want to die gloriously in meaningless skirmishes, let them. We'll complete our primary objectives while they exhaust themselves against our scouts. It was a logical decision based on traditional military thinking. Ignore the harassment attacks and focus on strategic objectives. But Velter had made the same mistake that countless predators had made when facing humans throughout their evolutionary history. He had assumed that the initial attacks were the full extent of their enemy's capabilities. In the command center beneath Geneva, General Martinez watched the opening phases of the battle with grim satisfaction. Human losses were within acceptable parameters, and the intelligence gathered from the initial engagements was invaluable. The Void Hunters were powerful and sophisticated, but they were also predictable in their responses to unexpected tactics. "General," reported Colonel Park, "the enemy is accelerating their advance toward core systems. They're moving faster than our original projections." "Expected, they think we're just trying to bleed them before the real battle. Signal all gateway stations. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 of Plan Lazarus was designed around a simple principle. If the enemy wanted to reach the core systems quickly, then the Allies would use that urgency against them. Instead of trying to stop the Void Hunter advance, they would let it proceed while turning the journey into a running battle that would consume enemy resources with every light year gained. Human strike forces, reinforced by Allied squadrons, began hitting Void Hunter logistics formations throughout their advance route. Supply ships, carrying the resources needed to sustain a fleet of 58 million vessels, found themselves under constant attack by enemies that appeared without warning and vanished before escorts could respond. The synthesis contributed their most sophisticated electronic warfare systems, creating false sensor readings that led entire Void Hunter formations into carefully prepared ambushes. Ethereal psychic warriors infiltrated enemy communications networks, spreading confusion and false information throughout their command structure. Draconian, heavy ships served as anvils against which lighter human forces could hammer isolated enemy formations. But the most devastating attacks came from weapons that most galactic civilizations would have refused to use. Project Sunbreaker claimed its first success in the Vega system, where human engineers triggered a controlled solar flare that sterilized a Void Hunter staging area along with everything else in the system. Project Voidcutter opened artificial gravitational anomalies that tore apart enemy formations and left spacetime itself twisted and scarred. The war that had begun with conventional fleet actions was evolving into something darker and more terrible than anything the galaxy had seen before. Supreme Commander Velter stood before the tactical displays in his command chamber, his confidence slowly eroding as reports continued to arrive from throughout his fleet. What should have been a straightforward advance to the galactic core was becoming a nightmare of constant harassment, supply chain failures, and casualties that mounted with every hour. "Commander," his intelligence officer reported, "we've lost contact with the 7th Harvester Fleet. Last transmission indicated they were engaging a small enemy force in the Altair system." Velter manipulated the display to show the Altair system's last known status. The 7th Harvester Fleet had consisted of over 200 vessels, including several planet crackers. That such a force could simply disappear suggested enemy capabilities that went far beyond the intelligence reports his scouts had provided. What was the composition of the enemy force they engaged? "Unknown, Commander. The transmission was cut off before tactical details could be provided." This was the third major formation that had simply vanished without trace. Either the enemy possessed weapons capable of destroying entire fleets without leaving debris, or they had somehow captured Void Hunter vessels intact. Both possibilities were deeply troubling. "Commander," another officer interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the advanced scouts. They've reached the outer."